One of the last major storylines of the Legends timeline was the fall of Han and Leia's son Jacen Solo to the dark side, covered in the Legacy of the Force novels by Aaron Alston, Troy Denning, and Karen Traviss. The series had 9 books, alternating between the authors every book, so it would be Aaron Alston, then Karen Traviss, then Troy Denning, then Aaron Alston, etc. Authors working on Star Wars books and Legends especially tended to have their own sets of characters they primarily used, generally as the supporting cast on top of the characters from the original trilogy, and another collection of characters that grew into mainstays over time, usually because they held positions that fit more directly into any given story. So characters who ended up on the Jedi Council like Silgal, Corran Horn, and Kip Durin would end up in those categories, or important politicians like Chiefs of State Bors Phalia and Cal Omas. Because of the alternating authors, this tendency to focus on different groups of characters comes across pretty strongly in the Legacy of the Force books, especially in the first 2/3, as all the different plot lines get laid out and they haven't really all come together yet. For the most part, I think this tendency and its impact on Legacy of the Force specifically is fine. It can help keep the books feeling fresh from one to the next, instead of feeling like just one really long book that blends together. Wedge Antilles will show up in Alston's books, and then be mostly absent for a bit, same with Alem Arar and Jag Fell and Troy Dennings, but where it sometimes feels a little weird is with Karen Traviss, most of whose Star Wars work focuses on the Mandalorians, particularly the relationship between the clones and the Mandalorians. So in the middle of a bigger story about the fall of Jacen and the development of a new galactic civil war, you have Boba Fett as a major character dealing with a terminal illness and his responsibilities as Mandalore and a husband and grandfather, largely disconnected from anything else going on in any other character's plots. Honestly, I think Boba's story is pretty fun on its own, and this may just reflect a problem with this era of Legends publishing, where each novel was really supposed to capture the entire galaxy. You only really had the big flagship series going on, from New Jedi Order to Dark Nest to Legacy of the Force and then Fate of the Jedi. And if characters weren't going to be involved in the biggest events of the day, you just weren't going to hear about them, or they're not going to get their own side stories. So they kind of have to be shoehorned in if the author wants to do anything with them. So Karen Traviss wouldn't really have had the opportunity to just do a side set of Boba Fett novels the way you might have seen in earlier periods of publishing, or even in that period of publishing but in different eras. There was just a bigger feeling that the main story had to be driven forward. There were a couple extra books which did come out dealing with side characters more towards the end though, like Crosscurrent and Riptide, which were about Kyle Katarn's apprentice Jaden Korr from the Jedi Academy game, and there was also X-Wing Mercy Kill. But, in full spoilers from here on out, aside from Jacen killing Boba's daughter, there's not really a huge connection between Boba and what's happening in the rest of the galaxy. The Mandalorians do start to rebuild their manufacturing capabilities, and they get involved in some of the fighting, but until the final book, Invincible by Troy Denning, Boba is mentioned in the books not by Traviss a total of 3 times. Book 8, Revelation, which was Travis's third and final installment in the series, brought in Boba's biggest contribution to the primary plot, and it's one that I have some pretty mixed feelings on, leaning towards the negative side. Jaina Solo, Jacen's twin, decides that as not just Jacen's twin, but also as the Sword of the Jedi, a role Luke bestowed upon her in the New Jedi Order series in a kind of Force-driven declaration, that it would be up to her to capture or to kill her brother. This later gets formalized by Luke and the Council. They felt that the only individual sure to be able to defeat Jacen was Luke himself, but Luke felt, due to the fact that Jacen had killed his wife Mara, that he would be unable to face Jacen without succumbing to revenge and then falling to the dark side, leaving Jaina as the best choice to like this video and subscribe for more, as well as going after her brother Darth Caedus. When Jaina decided to confront Jacen aka Caedus though, she decided she needed more training. Jacen was a more powerful Force wielder than her, thanks to not just his training to become Darth Caedus, but also because Jacen had spent 5 years after the Yuuzhan Vong War on a journey to learn about as many different Force traditions as possible. Jaina's extracurricular activities, on the other hand, focus more on her training as a starfighter pilot, leaving her at a disadvantage against Jacen in a traditional Jedi duel. To address this deficiency, she goes to the natural, obvious choice to teach her how to take down the galaxy's reigning Sith Lord, Boba Fett. This has always felt weirdly executed to me, but I'll start with some of the positives. Really, a lot of this video is going to be me working through my own feelings on some of how this went, and in theory, I don't mind it per se. There's a lot of emphasis placed on the fact that what the Mandalorians can teach her is to not fight like a Jedi, because Jacen is used to her fighting like a Jedi. He knows her fighting style, and he's more powerful, so she needs some way to unsettle him and approach him in a way that he's not going to expect. And I think going to the Mandalorians to learn something extra to bring to the table works perfectly fine. The biggest thing she learns from them is to leave aside any Jedi niceties. No emotional monologuing before attacking, no witty banter, just go in and do the thing. And this really does work out for her. She's able to get an advantage in their duel by basically impaling him as the door opens, and he tries to say hello. Another big advantage though was that Jacen spent their whole duel distracted by the need to warn his secret space girlfriend Tenel Ka that there was an attempt to kill their daughter underway. Overall, I think trying to frame this as Jaina learning Mandalorian fighting styles as a way to shake up the battle works, and if it had just been framed that way, I wouldn't have the same problems with it that I ended up with. So on that negative side, the plotline of training Jaina is pretty full of Mandalorian glazing, and some particularly major Boba glazing. For one thing, Jaina seeks Boba out not just because he'd have an alternative combat style to what her uncle Luke might be able to teach her, but because Boba is apparently some major player when it comes to successfully taking out Jedi. To highlight this, Boba is shown as being in possession of a bunch of lightsabers from Jedi that he'd killed over the years. Part of the problem here is that the idea of Boba Fett as some prime successful Jedi hunter is coming kind of out of nowhere. In support of this, we do know that he has a big grudge against Jedi, and we have the nearly successful attempt to take out Mace Windu in the Clone Wars, but that's still only a nearly successful attempt. There are a few other instances where we've seen him go after or fight against Jedi, but never particularly successfully. There's Tatooine in Return of the Jedi, where he and Luke were technically fighting, which ended up pretty badly for him. There's also his fight against Jaden Korr over a weapons cache on Ord Mantell in Jedi Academy, which he loses, along with a couple others. And it is certainly impressive that he's able to go against some pretty powerful Force users and not die, and I think you could build a reason for Jaina to seek Boba out just with those. But that's a bit different than coming out of almost nowhere with not just a collection of lightsabers, but a reputation strong enough as a successful Jedi killer that Jaina has him at the top of her list of people to teach her how to take out a Sith Lord. Not to mention that there are two people in her immediate family who have shown success in taking out Sith Lords, one of whom also isn't Force sensitive, and that's her father Han. We actually do have a pre-existing example of this lightsaber collection though, technically. The Star Wars Tales comics are some mostly non-canon stories, and in issue 11, Boba Fett and Darth Vader are both going after Han Solo. Boba doesn't want Vader taking his bounty, so the two end up fighting, and Boba pulls out a lightsaber, saying Vader isn't the only one to have killed Jedi. But again, these stories aren't really considered canon. I'm still fine with them being used as a basis to pull stuff in. A lot of the events of the Star Wars Marvel comic run are kind of ambiguously canon, they work in until they don't, and Legacy of the Force in particular pulls a lot from them. So I do like when some of those references get brought in. So aside from the general overpowered status of the Mandalorians in these novels, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute, the biggest thing really is just how out of nowhere this reputation feels like it comes. I might feel differently if there was a bit more of an explanation for where it comes from, like if we even had a better idea of which period Boba was successfully taking out Jedi in. I think it makes most sense to assume this would have been as part of the Jedi Purge under the Empire, and that successful Jedi hunting is what gained him respect from Vader. But the way the relationship between the Mandalorians and Jedi is talked about in Legacy of the Force, referring to how they're consistently still rivals, it feels more to me like we're supposed to take it as Mandalorian bounty hunters, including and especially Boba, were successfully taking out members of Luke's order over the last 20 years, which feels much weirder. The Mandalorians in the story talk about their relationship with a Jedi named Kubariat, who they worked with in the Yuzon Vong War, as a kind of counterfactual to their normal relationship, treating the Vong War as a pause in an actively confrontational relationship, rather than a relationship which used to be more directly hostile in older times. But I think what really pushes me against how this storyline was handled is that it leans so far into the skill of not just Boba, but all Mandalorians in fighting against Jedi, instead of leaving it at the level of the alternative skills that Jaina is seeking to bring against Jacen. Jaina trains with both Boba and some of his subordinates, primarily a Mandalorian named Goran Bevan, and they all kind of just start off by wiping the floor with her. Jaina is apparently so incompetent she's taken off guard by anyone just attacking her, where even though she knows they're sparring, she's just absolutely shocked and unable to react if they come at her out of a pose that isn't a clear fighting stance. Aside from the fact that the Force normally helps out here with some kind of danger sense, and even most people are probably going to be aware that they're going to be run at some point, it just feels like Jaina, one of the most accomplished Jedi in the Order by this point already, is being treated by the story as an absolute novice, and the Mandalorian fighting style of "just attack, bro" is apparently always and forever the answer to some overly produced and choreographed Jedi fighting style, which is why Mandalorians must clearly always be the best at beating Jedi, and why they do it so consistently in every battle we see them in. Because again, I'm fine with the Mandalorians having things to teach her about alternate styles and ways to approach the duel that'll throw off Jacen because he expects more standard Jedi moves from Jaina, particularly taking away her hesitation to kill Jacen if the opportunity arrives. That is definitely a Jedi tendency which does exist and which the Mandalorians don't have, something which could prove fatal for her in a duel with a Sith Lord who also won't hesitate. But it feels like those more applicable elements get sidelined in favor of just showing how Mandalorians are absolutely the best warriors to ever war. We even get introduced to what's essentially Mandalorian sicko mode, where the lack of hesitation to take out an enemy when they have a chance turns into this ability to activate a brutally efficient combat psychopathy, allowing them to go all out and kill their opponent in a battle with no hesitation. While on the other hand, you have Jaina being so shocked that Mandalorians wouldn't apply these rules of combat that she's always been taught, that she is unable to effectively counter a single thing they do. I mostly just think a lot of the positives of this plotline could have been handled without needing to make Jaina, or the Jedi as a whole, seem so incompetent, and make the Mandalorians seem like these godlike warriors who can beat anyone one-on-one. I'm hardly the first person to express some dislike for how Mandalorians get handled in Star Wars media, but maybe someday I should expand that to their whole political setup as well. Let me know what you think in the comments though. How did you feel about this particular plotline in Legacy of the Force if you've read it? Either way, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Special thanks to the patrons and the channel members for their support, and to Marmar for editing this video. Hope to see you next time.